We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
It's December 2019 and we're in the Blue Mountains just outside Sydney. At this time of year, tourists usually flock here for the stunning scenery and well-renowned bushwalks. But this summer is different. This is Black Summer. Across the country, 17 million hectares of land are burning. That's almost the size of France. The fires have been raging for months and there's no end in sight. Greg Mullins has dedicated his life to fighting fires, and he's doing his best to help the residents, wildlife and homes under threat. It's midnight and he stares up at the 50-metre high wall of flames. He's been here for 16 hours today. His uniform is charred. His mind starts to play tricks on him. Deep down, he knows that the rain will come. One day, this will be over. But what if it doesn't end? What if it just keeps burning until next summer? Until there's nothing left to burn? I'm at Middleton, and this is Head Game. Today, on the front line, in one of the nation's most catastrophic bushfires. Now, I'm super excited. I have the firefighter extraordinaire, Greg Mullins, in studio with me. Now, Greg, after your name, you have multiple initials. So it goes Alpha, Oscar, Alpha, Foxtrot, Sierra, Mike. So AOAFSM. Could you just break that down for me, mate? Because I know you're someone super important when you've got all of those initials after your name.
Yeah, lots of letters. AA is an officer of the Order of Australia. So it's
Gotcha.
The Australian Honours System, and that's the second highest one. And the AFSM is the Australian Fire Service Medal. So it's I don't know how many a year. There's not that many a year are given out Australia-wide to people Amazing. In the fire services. So
I got it right. Firefighter extraordinaire. Now, fascinating career. But where did it all start for you, mate? When did you think to yourself, right, I'm going to become a firefighter. This is what I want to do. Your father was a volunteer firefighter. Did it all stem from him?
Oh, look, pretty much. We lived in an area in the north of Sydney, beautiful area, but surrounded by National Park. And every summer there were fires, and you'd just look out over the hills and there'd be brown smoke and at night orange glows. And so you were really tapped into the fire danger. If it was hot and windy, you knew, it's really dangerous today, and Dad will probably take off on the fire truck. And but I think the day I decided I needed to be a firefighter was when I burnt down my sister's cubby house when they were both at school, and in the backyard of our house. And wow. It scared the hell out of me.
Take me back to that moment. Were you like me? Did you like to play with matches?
Look, I think I was only about 4 years old, and my sisters had built this magnificent cubby house in the backyard, but it was made out of dried leaves and grass and branches and things, and I was just playing with some matches, and it caught fire. And Dad was at work, and there you go. But I just remember looking at the flames up in the treetops, and the lady next door and my mum getting buckets of water because there was no reticulated water. We were on water tanks, and it scared the hell out of me. And then when my sisters came home, I just remember I thought they're going to beat me up, my older sisters, but no, they just cried, and I thought, I felt so bad. So I think actually
that's probably a worse punishment
maybe it's
for you,
about
right?
4 years old.
Wow. And you felt you felt
I
really
thought
bad, right?
I better put these things out, not light them, because it's not and jail's not a good trajectory. I don't really want to go there when I get older. So but look, my first big fire was actually I was 12 years old, was 1971. As I said before, Dad was a volunteer firefighter. The fire station was just over the road from our place, but there was a big fire. Dad wasn't on duty that day, but my older brothers called during the afternoon and said, we're home alone, my sister and I, this big fire's coming towards us, what do we do? And Dad just said, come with me. We jumped in the car and off we went, and I fought my first big fire, and I was hooked. It was really scary, but...
I love how you just came out with that. I fought my first fire when I was 12 years old. Wow. Talk about that being in the blood and, that being your destiny or your career. Take me back to that moment. Were you scared? Were you panicked? What was going through your mind? Because it takes a certain state of mind, doesn't it, to be able to run towards something that's burning rather than what the majority of people do, and probably rightly so, is run away from it. Yeah,
yes, a bit counterintuitive, but I think from that early age I was fascinated by fire, and I used to watch how fires burnt. And we used to do burn-offs in our backyard because we're in the bush and we had to protect ourselves from when summer fires came. And I knew quite a bit, and I'd read about it. I was really fascinated. I was a bit of a fire nerd by age 12, and I was just excited. I thought, gee, Dad's taking me with him. And Dad was so calm, and over the years I went to many, many fires with him. And in the military, you got some commanders who scream and yell and make everyone panic. And Dad was just one of these calm people who just calmed everyone around him down. And so I had no reason to be scared because of Dad's just calm, collected way went around about it. And even when, we had 20-metre flames coming towards us and sparks setting the grass alight under our feet, they just said, okay, move over here and just, all right, and if it gets too bad, we'll go in the house, and if that catches fire, we'll wait till the last minute, then we'll come out onto the burnt stuff. And it was just, oh, okay, this is normal. But yes, there were some frightening moments, but not for a moment did I feel like it was unsafe because my dad was there.
And it was from that moment that you knew? Was that a turning point in or a decision-making moment where you said to yourself, I want to be a firefighter?
I think so. I think that was the day.
Yeah, that was.
And I just thought, this is, you're against the elements and you're helping people, and it ticked all the boxes, and it was exciting, but there was an adrenaline rush as well. And it was really challenging. You had to actually work out what's going on here. The fire's going to go quicker uphill, but it's flat here, so it'll slow down. Then we can go in and attack it. The intensity will die down, but then it's going to come at us from the back. So we've got to be ready for that. And it was really mental gymnastics, working out what's happening. And, I can't see now. There's too much smoke.
Trying to outsmart the flames, ultimately, aren't you? You're always trying to stay one step ahead.
Yeah. And it was... intellectually stimulating. You've got your strategies and your tactics and then your tasks, and everything sort of led to the same outcome you hoped. But halfway something weird would happen, a new fire would break out over there, and you'd have to start again and change it all. And so you had to be flexible, and it was just a really, really interesting thing to do.
Love it. So when did you actually join the fire service? When was the day that you thought, do you know what? Let's go and join up. Let's do what I do best.
Yeah, so look, 1971, that big fire, and 1972, I remember a friend at school said, do you want to join the bushfire brigade down here at Duffy's Forest? And I said, well, they were adjoining suburbs, and I asked Dad if I could join locally, and he said, you're too young. You need to be 16 before you get on the truck in Terry Hills. And so... I was able to join this other bushfire brigade, and as someone pointed out to me, it was actually my brother, he said, that's because they'll take anyone. They're desperate. That's why they've taken you, pal.
Oh, so they made you feel special then?
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. But that was a good grounding, and then a couple of years later I did join up the local brigade, which was just over the road from us, and lots of fires through the 1970s, mainly bushfires, but also occasional house fire and car fires, car accidents. So,
I suppose when you join up, especially in Australia, you're going to see active duty, and I call it active duty because it's exactly that, weekly, if not daily.
Yeah. Look, and I became a full-time firefighter as soon as I left high school when I was 18, and 1978, early 1978, and I worked in the city here where we are now. And that the City of Sydney headquarters here, what we'd do, 15,000 calls a year or something. It was just constant. You'd back into the station, you'd go to another one, and a lot of them were false alarms, automatic fire alarms, but lots of chemical spills, car accident rescues, building fires, weird things, and it was just constant. And if you're in the suburbs in summer, you were going to a lot of bush and grass fires, and the objective was keep them small, get to them quickly, keep them small. And on hot, windy days, we'd double the response, so we'd get there quickly and be able to round them up. But some of them just got away, and you could fight these fires for weeks. So it was, learn it. And fire services these days, when I joined, it was mainly just fire, but then, the chemical spills and the rescue, the first aid,
accidents,
helping ambulance.
motorways.
So it was, and again, such incredibly rewarding work, and the people you worked with, just salt of the earth. They do, they put their lives on the line for someone they've never met and they'd put their lives on the line for you. And a couple of situations I was in, I thought, I'm done. Someone's grabbed me and dragged me out, and so and you think, wow, what a privilege working with people like that, men and women who'll give their all. So,
what was the first situation that you actually found yourself in when you were like, wow, I'm in deep here. I need the team. I'm not going to get out of this alone.
Yeah. Well, I do. And so it was a bushfire locally. Well, it was a hazard reduction burn off, but the weather forecast was wrong. And Dad was in charge of this group. There's about 10 of us down in a valley with just hand tools to cut fire breaks, and term is overrun. We were overrun by the fire. So it went, flames were 3-4 metres high. They suddenly went to 10, 15 metres high. And it was Dad's calmness got us out of that. He got us onto a rock shelf, and a lot of sparks. We got some burns, and a couple of got smoke inhalation, but we got out of it alive. But I think without someone as calm and as experienced as my dad, there would have been panic, and so that was pretty hairy. But look, I had quite a few over the years. I was at a building fire on my 20th birthday. I remember it well, and in North Sydney, it was about 3 stories on fire, and I went into one level with a line of hose, and the roof came in and knocked me. I was pinned by a big beam. But I had a breathing apparatus cylinder on my back, so that saved me because it would have broken my back. And I was stuck, but it was all burning around me, and couldn't find the hose. The bloke who was with me, I don't know what happened to him. Later on, he got separated from me, but I was able to crawl out, work my way around the walls because that's the strongest bit. There was still stuff collapsing, and there's fire up above me and around me, and made it to the balcony, and everyone's digging. And I said, what's happening? They said, there's a young bloke from 36 station trapped under there. And I thought, oh, no, it's the bloke I was with. So I started digging, and I said, who is it? Who's trapped? And they said, Greg Mullins. I said, no, not, it's me. So
wow.
And look, I remember I had a really good boss at that time, and he took me aside and he said, you didn't do anything wrong. We sent you in there, and we didn't realise it was ready to collapse. But firefight, that's the thing. Firefighters, you've got to know about chemistry, hydraulics. If you're on the 10th floor and you want a certain pressure on your hose, what do you pump at? What's the friction loss? You've got to know building construction. You've got to be a bit of an electrician. What's the power doing? What have I got to look at? A plumber. There's all these things you have to know, and it's just got more and more complex over the years. But that's what makes it such a wonderful career. And again, back to the men and women on the front line. You just don't find better human beings. I loved working with them and still do.
Black Summer, 2019, going on to 20. You're established. What rank are you holding at this stage in the fire service?
I'd retired. So
Retired.
I retired in January 2017. So as I did 14 years as Commissioner of Fire and Rescue New South Wales, which is one of the world's largest fire services. And look, I'll be open about it. I had to get out because I had PTSD, and I sort of tried to deny it to myself, but my head was not in a good space, and it was just time. I had to go. And
you did you recognise that, or did someone else recognise that?
I was in denial. I knew all the signs.
That's PTSD. Right?
And I was too busy looking after other people, and but it just came to a head, and look, I remember.
Was there a moment that you thought something's not right?
We had a former Major General from the Australian Army speaking to a mental health conference of fire services that we'd arranged, and I was up the front and I'm listening to him. He's written a book called Exit Wounds, and he was talking and I was just ticking the boxes as he went. And I remember someone said, "Are you okay?" Because my legs bouncing and I've fidgeting and I had to walk out, and it all sort of opened the gate. And so it was, and I finally did something that a lot of men don't do. I sought help. And, this is one of the cultural things in fire services in particular, heavily male-dominated, and blokes don't tend to talk about their feelings. And it was one of the reasons I pushed hard for women. And Fire and Rescue New South Wales now has the largest proportion of frontline women than any fire service in Australia and up there in the world. But it's changed the culture for the better. People talk more. But, that was really confronting, just to go and talk to someone and say, I don't feel the best. And it very quickly sort of escalated the diagnosis and everything. And they said, you're in a pretty bad way. And I said, yeah, but I'll be right. And they said, no, you won't.
The default answer, I'll be fine. I'll be all right. That's when you know that you're not.
And look, I remember the day I retired. It was just this huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't responsible anymore. And the thing, you'd know in the field you've been in, triggers. And my trigger was losing someone and going to knock on the door and tell a family they'd lost someone, and I didn't have another one in me. And every time a pager went off, I'd have a panic attack going, no. And the day that I stopped and I gave it back, I thought, oh, thank God.
That didn't last too long, right?
Yeah.
Because you got called up for...
Yeah, look, Dad tapped me on the shoulder and he said, they're short of volunteers, mate, locally, and you're able-bodied. And I've gone... Yeah, okay. But look, it had been my plan. And that was the odd thing. People say, what you got out of that because you weren't well and you went back into... I said, yeah, but it's different. It's that leadership stuff and being responsible. That's and you feel an obligation.
Of course you do. 100%.
A lot of
it's
money.
Your country calling for you again, ultimately.
Yeah, they've invested a lot of money.
Yeah.
I know I've worked with the London Fire Brigade, with Los Angeles City Fire Department, New York Fire Department, New York Take. Been around the world, got all this knowledge. So just say, oh no, I'm retired now. I'm going to the beach. Well, no, it's not. It wasn't going to. And look, if there was smoke on the horizon, and I couldn't do something about it, that really hurt me. It was no. I've got to do something. So I went back to being a volunteer. So leading up to those fires, that was the original question you asked. I was a deputy captain, so I was a crew leader. Just in charge of a crew, but I had. All the qualifications to be a group leader in charge of a number of brigades and to be an incident controller. And so I'd get called in to do command roles or just take a crew to a small fire and put the fire out. But, the lead up into 2018 was almost Black Summer, but then it rained in New South Wales in November, and we lost homes very early in the piece, so earlier than we'd ever really had big fires before in August. Shouldn't have been until October. Big fires in the state of Queensland, Tasmania, in places that had never burned before. And
So this was prior to
and just
so the warning signs were.
They were.
Did that ring alarm bells to you?
Yeah. No, I was losing sleep, and I'd been tapped on the shoulder by the Australian Climate Council to come on board as a member, as a natural disasters expert, and they were formed after the Liberal National Party government that came to power in I don't know what year immediately sacked everybody on the Climate Commission. So they got crowdfunded. The community crowdfunded them. They became the Climate Council. So I'd come on board and I was telling the Climate Council something really, really bad is coming. This is 2018. We just dodged a bullet, but millions of hectares were burnt, dozens of homes.
Yeah, this is out of the norm. This is this is.
And if it doesn't rain in 2019, I don't know what it's going to look like, but it's not going to be good. So yes, that's where I was at.
So did they listen to you?
Absolutely. And what I put to the Climate Council, I said I think it would be really beneficial to have former fire chiefs who can speak, because when you're employed by government, you're bound by government policy and you don't come out criticising the government, or you can, but you won't have a job for much longer.
Yeah.
But I want to form this group of former fire chiefs, and they said, yep, go for it. So to cut a long story short, 1 week of phone calls, and I had 23 former fire chiefs from every fire service in Australia just saying, look, we're as worried as you are. We've got to do something. We've got to go to the government. We've got to go to the Prime Minister, because this is going to blow up at the end of this year. And that didn't turn out to be that successful, because the government didn't want to listen, because we said 2 horrible words, climate change. And ideologically, that was a no-no. So they just attacked us.
Wow.
And said we were, what the Deputy Prime Minister called us at the time, time wasters, inner city latte sipping.
You're joking me.
Yeah, idiots or something. It was something like that. And it was actually amusing just to see how juvenile they were. But the Prime Minister would not respond to our letters and would not meet with us, and we were just saying very simple things like you need to streamline how you use the military, because they'll tell you that it's the system that's 30 years old is broken and it's very hard for them to help with assets, etc. And the fire chiefs at the moment have asked for just $12 million because they need more firefighting aircraft that they lease from overseas, and they got to get in now. And they just said no. And $12 million was a rounding error in the federal budget, but they just wouldn't. And because it was because we mentioned climate change.
And they were soon eating their words, right? When did it start to really get out of control? When was the next, let's call it the next wave? Because ultimately that's what happened. You had the warning shots over the bow, and now it's like no one took heed to that. Even though you didn't have the funding, did you start preparing for what you knew was coming?
Look, absolutely. And the fire services were just going, we don't know where it'll hit. We know it's going to be bad because we're in drought, and 2018 had been really hot. And in 2018, we looked to California. They lost 20,000 buildings in 2018, including the city of Paradise was basically destroyed and nearly 100 people killed. And often we follow California, our big fire seasons. So I factored that in and thought, so that's what happened to them. We've had this build-up. If it doesn't rain, if we don't get winter rains, pardon my French, we're screwed. And we didn't get the winter rains. So just to understand the fires, the legislation in New South Wales says we get our bushfires from 1st of October to 31st of March each year, because for 100 years that was a case. Yeah. So in July, months before that, we were having major fires, and by August we were losing homes. And in the past, no, you don't lose homes until near Christmas, maybe November. But and September 6th, I remember September 6th, we had catastrophic fire weather in northern New South Wales and had never even got close before.
You remember that date,
yeah.
September
and
6th.
I just watched this unfold in southern Queensland, and wet rainforest, or so-called wet rainforest that had dried out, was burning. That stuff that hadn't burnt from it. It was Gondwana rainforest from the same as it was when the dinosaurs were there, and it didn't burn. Now it was burning, just dozens of homes lost. And so the government started to dial back their denial, and all of a sudden,
started eating their
in
words,
September, contacted by one of the ministers saying, maybe we should talk to you. And we said, no, we want to talk to the Prime Minister. So they straight away said, they refused to talk to us. I thought, no, well, that's not actually the case. We said we want to talk to the Prime Minister. This is bad, but it's going to get a lot worse. So
this is just the start, This is.
And look, we did meet with two ministers. Prime Minister just would not talk to us, and they held a little press conference 10 minutes after we walked out of their office saying, we met with the old fire chiefs and we patted them on the head and said, don't worry, we've got this. And they need to have confidence in the current fire chiefs. So tried to make out that we were bagging the current fire chiefs, which was not the case. They were doing a brilliant job, but with one arm tied behind their back. And so it was just political, and it got worse from there.
It's mad to think that politics would be an obstacle for allowing you to save lives, to save the land, to save animals, to save wildlife, to save Mother Nature. You'd have any resistance from government. You'd think they'd go, right, listen, you know what you're doing, here's 100%, let's go, prevent it at all costs. But instead it's really bizarre that...
Look, and it was all down to ideology. And they had a platform for a decade saying there's really no such thing as climate change and we don't have to do anything. And we anything we do makes no difference. It'll be 3% or 0.3% of the emissions worldwide. So why would we ruin our economy? This was their rhetoric, but Australia's in the front line. So, and what we were saying was, but why did we tell other countries they should get rid of nuclear weapons or stop apartheid or whatever? We used to have moral clout because Aussies do the right thing, and they're not scared to front up to someone bigger than them and say, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. Yeah. On climate change, no, we're going to wimp it out. And, a cynic might say they had lots of friends in the fossil fuel industries helping to fund them. And that's what we're up against. And look...
So what point did it get to when it was like, the country's going to burn? This is serious. Because I remember it going global. The news went global. I remember seeing houses going... wildlife, koalas, kangaroo. Like it's almost as if Australia was on fire.
Well, look, it was, and every state and territory had major fires. So, and that had never happened before. They used to be sequential. They come from the north, and we'd share firefighters across borders. Yeah. All of a sudden, we're in the fight of our lives and couldn't help each other. The aircraft we needed. California still had fires and they wouldn't let a lot of them go because a big aircraft, we don't have any in Australia, or didn't have any in Australia then. We had to lease them. And so they were saying, no, we've got our own problems, you can wait. So the fires got bigger and bigger. The weather, it was the worst weather ever recorded. So for months and months and months, there's a whole lot of things that contributed to that in the Antarctic and the tropics, and they were unusual weather patterns, but we had drought. So we had strong westerly winds coming off the desert, off the interior, the outback, hitting the coast, very low humidity, very high temperatures. I was fighting fires one day, 21st of December 2019. It just about reached 50 degrees in Western Sydney. And I did a 26-hour shift and ended up in bed with dehydration, pretty sick. And, we saved dozens of homes that night, but it nearly didn't make it home. And so it was horrendous weather. And as a young firefighter, I remember thinking, the old 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 38 degrees. That's about as hot as it would ever get. But then we were fighting fires regularly in 45, 47. It was just horrendous. And it took off in November again. And I was actually in California at the Kincaid Fire in Sonoma County. So I went over with the Climate Council. The ABC, Australian Broadcasting Commission, tagged along, and I went out to this fire, and they did a little special on it. It went to air, I think it was the 7th of November. Sorry, I'm a nerd, I remember dates. It's around about then. And me saying, well, look at this fire in California. Here's what's changing with climate change. They didn't get big fires like this in Northern California this time of year, but now they do. Same in Australia. And this build-up, this is the worst I've ever seen, and I'm really frightened about what's going to happen. So the next day, after they ran it across Australia, the fires went wild and lost dozens and dozens of homes, some lives.
And you're back to back at this stage. You know, every man and his dog is out. Are you undermanned as a fire service? Are all your resources stretched?
Well, it was just relentless.
Relentless, yeah.
And it was just, you're going from August and just there was no rest.
Months and months.
And people who lived in the fire areas, and I was really lucky. I thought if Sydney gets hit, that's where the real property losses have traditionally happened, is on the outskirts of Sydney and the Blue Mountains near Sydney. But we were losing hundreds of homes in regional areas, which had never happened before. And it just showed how big the fires were. But, people were exhausted and you couldn't get the interstate assistance because they had their own fires. You didn't have enough aircraft. I remember watching a drop on the south coast of New South Wales thinking, great. And then it was 2 hours before the next one because it had to fly back to Sydney and reload and come back. And it was just, there was no point.
Yeah.
And the small aircraft couldn't fly because wind was too strong. So we'd get days of catastrophic fire weather, which was a new rating we'd brought in because of climate change, because the weather was getting so bad. But most aircraft couldn't fly in those days because the wind was too gusty and strong, and there was a bad air crash. A C-130 Hercules went in on one of these days.
Yeah, I heard about that.
But it was just, horrific. So, look, it just got worse and worse and worse, and culminated on New Year's Eve 2019, the south coast of New South Wales, which is, hundreds of kilometres long, beautiful beaches, tens of thousands of people go there for their Christmas holidays. It was evacuated and there were dozens of huge fires. And I remember being down there on New Year's Day. We left Sydney about 4 a.m. It would have been hundreds of fire trucks heading down there, and we just couldn't do a thing because we had what we called a pyroconvective storm above us, and that means the fire was so hot the convection column pushed into the stratosphere and brought gale force, storm force winds to the surface, this incredibly dry air, and huge trees next to us were just getting snapped off like toothpicks and thrown around. And I didn't think I was coming home. Again, I thought, but you talked about the animals, and this is, I was back to my psychologist over this one because I can talk about it now without sort of tearing up, but it took a lot of work to get there. I remember being on a highway and there's factories burning and homes burning, and we didn't have any water and the power had gone and we couldn't get any water. And I saw something over on the side of the highway through the smoke. I thought, what's that? And I thought it was burnt hay bales. And then some of them started to move. And I went over closer and it was a mob of kangaroos who'd been caught in the forest and just caught fire and come out on the road and just died on the road. And I've never seen that because kangaroos know how to get away from fires. And I just... I'd cry if I talked about it for months. And I would, and it just said everything to me. I just thought my grandkids are going to grow up. This, millions of hectares have been sterilised for decades. Animals will come back, but nothing like when I was a kid, when my parents took me camping and you'd see kangaroos and koalas and echidnas and goannas and all this beautiful wildlife. It was wiped out.
I had a sense of worthlessness when you just said I was stood there, you're looking around, everything around you's on fire. You can't do your job because you've got no resources. And I can imagine me being in a war zone, with no weapon. Just wow, that must be some sort of headspace to be in. What was going through your head?
Oh, not good.
Yeah,
certainly not good. And look, the mental health issues with firefighters since then, and thinking you're going to die is, as you know, it's not a good thing. And you do that too many times and it plays with your head a bit. That's an understatement. But just not being able to help was soul destroying. I'm a firefighter, but I can't fight your fire. And sorry, I can't help you because I'm just dodging trees and I don't know if I'm getting out of here. I don't know if I'm going home from this. So, and it was just, it's just like having your legs cut off out from under you. It was just the whole reason for being, and he couldn't do it. And it brought it home to me. And I've got to say, I was so pissed off with the government that day. And a couple of days later, the Prime Minister had a press conference and said, I'm going to fix it all. I'm going to give them money for aircraft. I was pretty angry. And I actually don't talk about that much because I think it serves no purpose. But the other thing was
to bring up those
he went overseas on a holiday and didn't tell anyone. If he'd told people, fine, but he kept it secret because he knew he should have been there providing leadership during a disaster, but he took off. And so all that
all
together,
sorts of emotion. There's anger, resentment.
Yeah.
Worthless. You don't feel like you can do your job. You can't do your job. Negative emotions that you're having to deal with.
And you can't. But
how did you deal with it?
Well, you got to turn.
Did you go home and cry?
Positive.
How did you deal with that? Was there any moments that you sort of just broke down and was just like, what's going on?
And well, yes. But look, in my book, I talk about a day I was going out on the fire line again. It was that 49-degree day, but 2 days before I'd been fighting fires down in the south of Sydney, and 2 young dads were killed when a tree fell on their truck, and that's my trigger, the big one. And I went to a cafe before I was going on shift. I thought I'll have breakfast, and I walked in. I had the newspaper, and I opened it up, and there they are on the front cover. And the tears started. I've had to pull myself together. People are sort of looking at me because I'm in uniform, and I've got back in the car, and I thought, okay, deep breaths, right. All the techniques to right. So I go to the counter and order my breakfast, and then I just remember the barista came over to the girl on the cash register, and then the girl said, it's fine, it's taken care of. And I said, what? And she said, oh no, Flo here has paid for your breakfast. And she said, thank you so much for what you do. And I just thought of those 2 young dads, and I lost it. And it was so embarrassing, but just the tears and so brought it back. But how nice people are and how good, but these 2 young blokes, their families would never see them again.
And also the appreciation, that moment of kindness amongst the chaos. Yeah, I get it.
But you have to let it out, and I learnt that. And I reflected on that. But look, it reinforced with me we had a government that needed to go because they'd lost their moral radar and they weren't listening to the science. They were just listening to mates who didn't have much between their ears and wanted to make profits. And, I was dealing with misinformation, a certain part of the media, personal attacks, and because anyone who doesn't listen to what they want to say,
of course,
they attack them. And I just thought, this is sick, and I hope, and I always thought of the UK. Margaret Thatcher was the first Prime Minister who understood climate change because she was a scientist. She was the one who said we've got to take action on climate way back then. And so it's been both sides of politics. So, it's a given. It's changing a bit now. But why can't Australia be like that? We burn, we flood, why can't you see this?
Yeah. Was there ever a light at the end of the tunnel where you thought, it's starting to die down, it's starting to get control here, we're starting to take charge of these fires? A glimmer of hope, shall I say?
No, it was sudden because it was just getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
And what would happen, we'd get a couple of days lull in the weather, maybe 3 days, and then we'd look at the forecast, so it's going to be 45 degrees again, and look at the gale force winds. And we got hundreds of kilometres of fire front. They're all going to,
burn.
Just keep going. It suddenly rained. But it didn't just rain, it poured. And people were flooded. So we went from I went from hosing fires to hosing mud out of people's homes. And this is the trend. And and the basic science behind it is for every 1 degree rise in temperature, the atmosphere holds 7% more water. So as the insurance industry will tell you in Australia, most of the rain now comes in violent downpours and causes flash flooding and then riverine flooding.
Flash flooding, yep.
So we had record floods like we've never had before.
1 minute, like you said, you're dealing with the fires, the relief because you've got the rain, but too much of it, you're facing a whole different catastrophic event there, aren't you?
Yeah, so it was more predictable. The floods were more predictable, particularly when the rivers were flooding and going downstream, but the downpours weren't, the flash floods, and people lost their lives. And this is what we've seen worldwide. We call it climate whiplash. You go from one extreme to the other, and it's becoming more common.
I like that.
And so it was such a relief that the fires were out, but then we had thousands of homeless because of these floods, and we had 3 years, 2020, 2021, and particularly 2022, and it was we had a triple La Nina event 3 years in a row, and it's only happened a couple of times before, and so we're getting strange weather and strange climatic patterns, but it's all in the extreme end. Nothing's down the bottom. It's all bang, big punches, and communities getting hit over and over. So they get burnt out, then they get flooded, then they get flooded again.
So there was never a finish line then. There was never, this is the end of it. It was just one thing rolling into another, that whiplash going back and forth. In my head is there was this big event and it doesn't. I suppose it never ends for you guys, does it?
No, it doesn't. And there's day-to-day stuff. But look, the big strategic thing is to get the political class to say, you know what, we're going to actually get a bit of courage on board and do what needs to be done. And it was so gratifying, I have to say, to see that government that had been in for a decade of climate inaction swept out, and a lot of independents coming in who people didn't trust the two big parties anymore because they were so much alike. And so we had half a dozen, I think 7 independents, community independents. And one of them was a journalist who was with me in California. And when she did her speech to Parliament, she said, I was in California at this major fire with the former fire chief, Greg Mullins, and I just realised I've got to do something about climate. And I thought, how nice is that? And things have changed. There's action taking place, and there's some worldwide events in the US, for example. It'll put it back a little bit, but there's hope now. There's a lot. Yeah. China's doing a heap in the renewables space, but there's other things going on there, of course. But there's cause for hope, and you can't give in to doom.
It can't be ignored, especially when something like that happens.
No, but look, we're on a trajectory. I think the private sector's investing a lot of money into renewables. We're not reducing emissions yet, but we're getting close to being peak emissions, and then it'll drop. And I'm not giving up. I've got grandkids, but it's.
I suppose you can't give up, mate. It's not It's not that you've got that state of mind that it seems like that you'll be doing this, mate, until until you take your last breath, mate, by the sounds of it. Yeah. And I always say to people as well, with when I say, I can't wait to retire, my wife's like, and you're never going to retire, and I could sort of see myself in you, Greg, where you're just going to keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And what does the future hold for Greg Mullins? Where are you at right now? Can you step away, or would you want to step away?
No, and look, people talk about retirement, and the old view of retirement was you get a rocking chair and sit in the corner and read a book or something. No way. There's life to be lived out there.
I can see it, mate.
I love life, and I love my family and my friends, and I live in a magnificent part of the world. I've rebuilt Mum and Dad's home that they built in the 1950s, and I'm back. I look at the big tree out the front that I used to climb 60 years ago when I was a kid, and just think, how lucky am I? I'm doing stuff that I love, and I'm seeing a difference. And I'm not saying I made the difference, but there's people have woken up and look. Out of every bad thing, some good comes, and those terrible fires, worst fires in Australian history, the biggest, the most homes lost, all the rest. People woke up and went, oh my God. And they went, and this government lied to us, and they swept them out of power. And I thought, there's hope. You know, and there's, as I said, there's climate action happening and way above my pay grade, and some very smart people doing incredible things and really good moral politicians leading the way, and I feel good about that. And so I'll just keep doing my little bit, whether it's locally going to a house fire or whatever, or taking charge of a bushfire, or writing a submission to a Senate inquiry, or whatever. But I'll just keep doing what I'm doing and hope it makes a bit of a difference. And so,
mate, well, listen, I rarely use this word, and I don't think... because I don't like to use them. I think they're overused. But, mate, you're a hero. Honestly, you're a legend and a hero. And I say that not lightly, because I've seen few heroes and a few legends. But, mate, you're certainly one of them. And thank you ever so much for coming on my podcast, Head Game. It's been a fascinating chat.
Thank you for that.
I mean,
coming from someone like you, I'm very humbled.
I mean it, and I'm humbled to be sat opposite you, mate. Thanks again, Greg.
Thanks, Ant.
Greg Mullins is the author of Firestorm. If you'd like to check it out, I'll link the details in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of Head Game. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a review. I'm at Middleton. Catch you in the next episode.